Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Raimundo Rios Mayo Library in Arkanasa. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Welcome to Strange Things. Hope you all enjoyed our last session when we discussed UFOs. Tonight we'll be talking about ghosts. Ghosts, what are they? There are lots of theories. Lots of people will tell you what they think ghosts are. Merriam-Webster Dictionary says a ghost is the soul of a dead person, thought of as living in an unseen world, as appearing to living people. There are other examples of ghosts, however. There's such a thing as the ghost of a person who's not dead yet. They call it a doppelganger or double walker. There have been instances in the past where people have seen a person only to discover later that that person was not anywhere near the town where they saw them in. We'll give some examples of that later on. Luciano Guajardo, born December 1st, 1923, died November 18th, 1984. Luciano was the original ghost hunter here in Laredo. He started out living in La Azteca neighborhood. He was fascinated by books, and he loved history. When he got a chance, when he was finally old enough to get a job, he went to work at the Laredo Library as a cataloger in 1951. He worked well, he was diligent, he showed up every day. The people at the library liked him, and he was doing such a good job, they decided to promote him to librarian in 1961. As a librarian, he ran the library. It was his domain. But he also had outside interests, one being what they called the club. The club was a group of people who were all interested in ghosts and unexplained phenomenon. They didn't want anyone knowing that that's what they were interested in, so they didn't call it the Ghost Hunting Club, and they didn't call it the Ghostbusters. They simply referred to it as the club. Luciano had some very interesting stories, and he was not concerned with other people's opinion of what he did. If you asked him if he believed in ghosts, he would simply say, "Oh yes, and let me tell you this story." They had numerous occasions to investigate throughout the city of Laredo. One of the more interesting cases that they worked on was in St. Peter Plaza, the former home of Mary Help of Christians School. While the nuns were there running the school, they never had any problems, never reported anything unusual happening. But it was after the nuns moved away from St. Peter Plaza and moved up to their Del Mar location, a store was opened in the same building that the nuns had been using. The store was called La Economica. They sold used clothes, but they didn't sell scraps and they didn't sell nasty-looking, torn-up clothing. They sold nice-looking clothes, but they were used. People on a budget still need to look good. The women working in the store started reporting strange occurrences. An old lady would come in, usually right towards the end of the day. She'd talk to the women, She'd tell them, I need to look for this and I need to check this out. I want to look at coats. I want to see something in the back room. And then she would hustle away to the back of the store. The women working the front of the building, around time to close, they'd start looking around the store. It's like, where did that old woman go? They couldn't find her. She'd vanished. Well, they got to thinking maybe she slipped out the back door, even though it was locked. Maybe they were imagining things, but they didn't know. They tried to ignore it, but she kept coming back. She would come in. She was never dressed the same, but she was always in dark clothing. She was always rather short with them, not very pleasant to talk to, and then she would go in the back of the store and disappear. The women at the store contacted Luciano, asked if there's anything he could do about it. He got the members of the club together. They went down to St. Peter Plaza to see if they could figure out what was going on. It turns out the building where the clothing store was located, the same building where the nuns had been, was formerly the residence of an old woman who lived there with her son back in the 1800s. She was extremely jealous of anyone trying to talk to her son, especially if that someone was a woman. She was convinced that all women were trying to simply woo her son away to get his money. Well, one day the son had business up in San Antonio. He left town, went to San Antonio, and never returned. He died of a heart attack. They put his body in a wagon and brought it back home, had a funeral and buried him. But the mother refused to accept that her son had died, even though she attended the funeral. She grew convinced that some horrible woman was trying to steal her son away. And from that time on, any women found in the vicinity of her house, she would go and look at them and ask them what they were doing and why they were there and why they wanted to steal her son away. The old woman died. The property was sold. It became a school for children. The nuns never had any problem with ghosts showing up. It was only after the nuns had moved on and the store was opened that they started seeing this woman. Luciano arranged for a psychic to spend the night in the building, and the psychic had a discussion with the ghost. Can't tell you exactly what was said. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't written down. But the psychic came to the conclusion that the old woman was simply trying to protect her son, who she believed was still in the house. Even her ghost refused to admit that the son had died. Today, no one has reported too many strange things in and around that area, but then the school administration kind of frowns on their people talking about ghosts. But it is said that they still see this old woman in black somewhere in the vicinity of the former residence, eyeballing any young women that she believes might be trying to get to her son. Don't go away. We'll be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James.
Little Farm, más de 30 especialidades de pechuga de pollo, fresco, natural, empanizado, congelado, preparado. Visítanos en Lincoln 3130 esquina con Morelos, Colonia Juárez, al teléfono 719-3044. Fácil de cocinar en casa. Little Farm.
En RG Servicios Aduanales y Ramírez Distribution Services contamos con un equipo de profesionales técnicos en comercio exterior, ejecutivos de cuenta, tramitadores y personal administrativo que se encargará de orientarlo y mantenerlo oportunamente informado de todos los cambios en materia aduanera y procedimientos relacionados con el despacho de sus mercancías. RG Servicios Aduanales, Coahuila 1520 Nuevo Laredo, 867-719-1804 y Ramírez Distribution Services, 501 Nafta Boulevard, Laredo, Texas, 956-726-8940.
Looking for a great cup of coffee? The Organic Man Coffee Shop at 1108 Lincoln, downtown Laredo, Texas. serving only the best organic coffee in the world. Not a coffee person? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and iced drinks if that's your drink of choice. The Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1108 Lincoln, downtown Laredo, just a half block west of the Mercado.
Though we gotta say goodbye.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed those brief commercials. Getting back to Mr. Fajardo, he said, there are two kinds of people in this world, those who believe in ghosts and those who do not. If those of you who believe in ghosts were asked to tell why you believe, it would take an hour, maybe 2 or 3, for you to tell why you believe in ghosts. Those that do not believe in ghosts, it would take you maybe 3 or 4 seconds. All you could say is, I don't believe in ghosts because I've never seen one. How do you know you've never seen a ghost? How do you know that man or woman you see standing on Santa Maria street corner is not a ghost? What would a ghost look like? We all believe, because of Hollywood, that a ghost is a semi-transparent creature that you see drifting a few feet above the floor, and when you speak to them or interact with them, they simply vanish. But that's Hollywood. My wife and I had gone to the hospital to visit someone who had broken their leg. And as we came around the corner near the elevators, a man who appeared to be in a large hurry rushed into the elevator. He had dark brown hair. He was wearing a white button-down shirt with a collar and a black necktie. He had on dark dress pants and shiny shoes. His shirt sleeves were folded twice at each cuff. I remember the person explicitly. He got on the elevator. He looked like he was in a hurry, so I waited for the doors to close so he could go on his way. After a couple of seconds, I pushed the button for the next elevator. The door to the elevator where the man had rushed in popped open. I thought, uh-oh, I've delayed this man in his trip. Or I'm seeing things because there was no one there. I convinced myself in a real big hurry that I was just seeing things, but then my wife said, we're sorry, we didn't mean to interrupt your... And then I saw her looking around the elevator. That's when I realized she had seen the exact same thing I had. I asked her to describe the man, and she described exactly the same thing I had just said. Dark hair, white shirt, dress pants, very big hurry, and she mentioned that his shirt sleeves were rolled up at the cuffs. He looked human. He looked solid. There was nothing transparent about him, and I saw his feet move across the floor. The question is, was this a ghost? If it wasn't a ghost, then what was it? He went into the elevator and simply vanished. People don't normally do that. Why are some places more susceptible to hauntings? Cemeteries. If I were a ghost, the last place I'd be hanging out would be a cemetery. And yet, you see kids, usually around Halloween, hanging around the cemetery looking for ghosts. Now, there are occasions when the dead may want to revisit the place of their burial. If the tombstones have been damaged or removed, this does tend to bring the ghosts back to the cemetery. An example of this would be the Shiloh Cemetery. At one time, there were probably 200 people buried at the Shiloh Cemetery. Their tombstones were all well placed. You could read them. They had cement vaults over the top of the interment places. And then a developer showed up one day and decided he wanted that land for houses. They didn't have the time or the money to remove all the bodies, so it was a lot quicker just to remove the tombstones. People objected. People from the Laredo Paranormal Research Society said, hey, you shouldn't do that. But orders were orders, and the contractor simply removed the headstones. They built the houses, people moved in, and suddenly they started seeing some bizarre things at night. People started reporting seeing a mysterious man or woman walking in the hallway or in the living room of their home, or they'd walk into the kitchen and surprise someone who would simply vanish. They heard voices, they heard knocking, they heard people walking about the houses at night. When the homeowners discovered that their house had been built on top of a cemetery, they were not pleased. Some of them sued, trying to get their money back from the developer. Some of them simply packed up their bags and moved out. Because the tombstones had all been removed, there's no way of finding out where the bodies were. Since there are houses built on top of them, it's just not going to happen. As a result, we now have a neighborhood that is having difficulty because of removed or damaged tombstones. Resurrection Mary. This is a story that comes down from Chicago, Illinois area. It's actually from a town called Justice, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. Most accurate version I could find, and there are many, a young woman named Mary had gone to a dance at a ballroom, the O. Henry Ballroom to be precise. She danced with her boyfriend, and they had a good time, but whether or not alcohol was involved, I don't know, but her and her boyfriend got in a fight. And she decided she would simply walk home. She stormed out of the building, out onto the side street, en route to her home. She was hitchhiking when a car came along and killed her. They buried her in the Resurrection Cemetery, and yet people driving along the street have reported seeing this woman walking from the O. Henry Ballroom towards the Resurrection Cemetery. They've watched her disappear into the bars, into the cemetery. Lots of people have seen her. Lots of people have theories as to who she may be. Her parents wish people would just stop coming to the house telling them that they saw their daughter. With so many people reporting having seen Resurrection Mary, it makes you wonder, is the ghost of Mary still wandering the streets? Or is she simply comes out once in a while to go to the ballroom to maybe have one more fling and then back into the cemetery? The places where people died. Now, there are some reports that wherever a person died, especially if it was a violent death, that they start haunting the location where they were last, where they breathed their last breath. Apparently their spirit has some kind of a connection to that area. As you're driving south on 83, just before you come to the town of San Ignacio, Texas, there's a curve in the road. People have been reporting seeing a pair of ghosts on the side of the road right there by the curve. Border Patrol agent friend of mine was telling me he was driving that way one night. Just as he's coming up on San Ignacio, he saw two men standing on the side of the road. They did not look like they belonged on this side of the river, so he braked the vehicle and pulled over to the side to question the two. It looked to him as if they had ducked down into the brush at the side of the road, so he jumped out of the vehicle and ran to the spot. There was no one there. The ground was wet. It had just rained earlier that day. There was mud in the ditch. Anyone standing or walking in that ditch would have left what we called sign, footprints. There was nothing there. His partner, who was sitting in the vehicle, was laughing at him. My friend asked, "What's so funny?" That's when his partner said, "You just saw the ghosts. People have been seeing these two guys standing on the side of the road for years. Several years ago, a couple of men from Mexico who had just swum across the river were attempting to cross the highway right there in that same spot when they were killed by a truck. Having died in that spot, apparently their spirits are still attached to that spot, and dozens of people have reported seeing these two ghosts standing on the side of the road just to the north of San Ignacio. Some spirits hang around in the place that they knew as home. For example, the case that Mr. Guajardo had looked into. A person may have had a very nice home built somewhere. They died for whatever reason. The home is sold to another family, and the next thing you know, they're seeing or hearing things that they can't explain. Most of the time, ghosts are simply an annoyance. Good friend of mine moved into a house. The realtor neglected to mention anything was wrong with the place. He was renting. He said he would get up, walk into the kitchen, fix a glass of iced tea, set the glass on the counter, put the jug back in the refrigerator, turn back to the counter, the glass would be gone. He'd look all over the kitchen. Where's the glass? He'd find it sitting up in a cabinet somewhere. Sometimes he'd find it in the refrigerator. At first he thought, well, I must have done that by accident. Then he got to noticing, this is happening way too much, and I'm sure I'm not crazy. He said also doors refused to stay closed. This was very annoying, especially when he was in the bathroom. He would go in, close the door, lock it, go over to the throne, sit down, and the door would swing open. He'd waddle over, slam the door, lock it again, go back to doing what he was there to do, and the door would swing open. Finally, he got so annoyed by all this, he simply told his wife, that's it, we're moving. That's when he discovered the previous tenants had moved out, and the tenants before them, and the tenants before them. Not a scary ghost, just an annoying ghost. Prisons and jails. Prisons and jails are notorious for holding people long after they've passed away. The surprising thing is some of the returning spirits are of inmates that had been released. They serve their time, they get out of prison or jail, they go back home, they live the rest of their life, they die for whatever reason, and surprisingly, the spirit has been known to return to the prison where they were held. It's almost as if the psychological entity is still in prison long after the person has been released. Darn near every prison, every jail I've ever visited, not as an inmate, every time I've ever been inside one of those places, you can actually feel the pressure of something weighing on your shoulders as you walk inside. Some of them are more than others, depending on how old the establishment is. When I toured Leavenworth Prison, you could feel the weight of past prisoners as you went in through the front door, almost as if you were being oppressed by some unseen figure. It didn't let up until you walked outside again. That image you see in the movies where the person walks out of the jail and he breathes a great big sigh of relief, there's more to that than just Hollywood. Once you walk out that front door, it's like the weight of the world has been lifted from your shoulders. Even the guards have been known to return to the prison or the jail after they've died. Why this is? It has something to do with all the emotions going on inside the building. There's nothing quite as stressful as the inside of a jail cell, whether you're working there or living there. Nobody that I know of ever says it's a fun place to be. Hospitals. Hospitals are notorious for having lots of strange activity long after the patients have all gone away. But there was one hospital that was having difficulty, and they were still open for business. It happened in Monterrey, Mexico. I don't have an exact date. I don't think anyone really has the date. The nurse was named Margarita. She worked long hours at what is called the IMSS Clínica 25. Her husband objected to the fact that she was spending so much of her time working and not enough time at home with her family. He felt he was raising their 2 daughters on his own. He was always asking her, "Why can't you spend more time at home?" And she was always saying, "I have to work. The patients need me." The husband was more like, "Well, I need you too, and so do your daughters." But Margarita was dedicated to her job. One night when she was at the hospital, her youngest daughter was involved in an accident. They rushed her to the hospital. She was in the emergency room. Margarita was unable to leave the 7th floor where she was assigned. After all, her patients needed her. Her daughter needed her too, but her patients needed her more. One of the nurses in the emergency room, unskilled, probably a new girl, accidentally gave the daughter the wrong medication, ending her young life. Margarita was devastated, but her husband was infuriated. "This is your fault. None of this would have happened if you had been in the emergency room with your daughter." Margarita did not feel good about that. She felt that everyone was blaming her for the child's death. Her husband took the other daughter and he moved away, leaving her on her own. Margarita continued working. She was a good nurse. She felt that her patients needed her. Her patients needed her a little too much. If she didn't have so many needy patients, her younger daughter would still be alive today. If they didn't work her so hard at that hospital, her younger daughter would still be alive today and her family would still be with her. If it wasn't for those patients on the 7th floor, her life would still be in good shape. It was those patients' fault. Margarita began to plot a means of revenge. She began carrying lethal doses of medication with her. Any time the whim came over her, she would seek revenge on whichever patient happened to be available. No rhyme, no reason. This patient would live, that patient would die. She began killing on a regular basis. The hospital staff started to wonder, why are so many people passing away on the 7th floor? It doesn't make any sense. But it's a hospital. People die in the hospital all the time. But the 7th floor was having an inordinate number of deaths. Nobody could explain why. No one ever would have explained why if one of the doctors hadn't walked in on Margarita administering a lethal dose of medication to one of the patients. When she was confronted by the doctor, she fled. She ran down the corridor seeking escape. The doctor immediately notified everyone in the hospital to be on the lookout for this woman. She's lost her mind. Margarita took up safe haven in one of the rooms. Unable to escape from the hospital, she decided to take her own life. Anything was better than going to prison forever. She administered a lethal dose of medicine to herself and died there on the 7th floor, the same place where many of her patients had met their end. We'll be back in a few moments after these brief messages. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio.
Little Farm, más de 30 especialidades de pechuga de pollo, fresco, natural, empanizado, congelado, preparado. Visítanos en Lincoln 3130 esquina con Morelos, Colonia Juárez, al teléfono 719-3044. Fácil de cocinar en casa. Little Farm.
En RG Servicios Aduanales y Ramírez Distribution Services contamos con un equipo de profesionales técnicos en comercio exterior, ejecutivos de cuenta, tramitadores y personal administrativo que se encargará de orientarlo y mantenerlo oportunamente informado de todos los cambios en materia aduanera y procedimientos relacionados con el despacho de sus mercancías. RG Servicios Aduanales, Coahuila 1520 Nuevo Laredo, 867-719-1804 y Ramírez Distribution Services, 501 Nafta Boulevard, Laredo, Texas, 956-726-8940.
Looking for a great cup of coffee? The Organic Man Coffee Shop at 1108 Lincoln, downtown Laredo, Texas. Serving only the best organic coffee in the world. Not a coffee person? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and iced drinks if that's your drink of choice. The Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1108 Lincoln, downtown Laredo, just a half block west of the Mercado.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing ghosts or just the neighbors, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Welcome back to Strange Things. Margarita had ended her life on the 7th floor. Things should have gotten back to normal. Oddly enough, patients continued to die more frequently on the 7th floor than anywhere else in the hospital. The staff couldn't explain this. Maybe Margarita wasn't the only person killing the patients? That just didn't make sense. Very rare do serial killers travel in packs. What could possibly explain the overabundance of dead patients on the 7th floor? Late one night, the staff working the hospital were alerted to something wrong when they heard a patient screaming, "Help me! Help me! She's trying to kill me!" The patient rushed down the hallway to see what was going on. When they entered the patient's room, they saw a woman dressed as a nurse, but in an old-style uniform. She was hovering over the man with a hypodermic needle, trying to jab it into his arm. The patient was literally fighting for his life. As the staff stood there in the doorway, horrified by what they were seeing, the nurse slowly vanished from their sight. They say that ghosts never hurt anyone. It's kind of hard to explain Margarita, though. To this day, the 7th floor of the hospital, Clinicia 25, is unused. They've closed the 7th floor. No one is allowed to go there. Oddly enough, theaters also have been known to have visitations from passed-on spirits. Not movie theaters, but the live-action theaters. It's almost as if all that energy that actors put into their performance holds them in that spot. So any live-action theaters have been known to have odd occurrences, especially the big ones, the old ones, up in the larger cities. If you have your own experience with a ghost sighting, or you'd like to share it with others, send me an email at chrisjames@stx.rr.com. We'll see about getting it into print. 2,000 years ago, the ancient Romans used to refer to ghosts as shades of the dead. They held festivals throughout the year to honor them, kind of like Halloween. They call it Lemuria, which is derived from the Remuria, a festival to honor Remus, one of the founders of Rome, as in Romulus and Remus. So even 2,000 years ago, they were celebrating something like Halloween. Why are they here? That's a question that has bothered a lot of people. Why is this place haunted and that place not? what can cause a ghost to be trapped in one location, whereas on other occasions you have a ghost shows up at a location, hangs around for a bit, and then leaves. Until we can actually sit down with a ghost and interview them and ask them what's going on, we may never get that answer. But it is said, if you buy furniture or if you have a painting, something that has been passed from hand to hand, if the original owner of that item was very fond of it, you could possibly be inviting a ghost into your home. My aunt lived in Anahuac, Texas, just to the east of Houston. She was always asking the kids in the house, my cousins, who was up last night? Who was walking around the house? Who was up when they were supposed to be in bed? She would accuse her husband, my uncle. You were up last night. I heard you tromping around the house. My uncle started to worry. Perhaps his wife had lost something upstairs. All the kids started to wonder, why is she acting the way she acts? Well, it wasn't until one day my uncle was sitting in the living room and he heard somebody walk up to him. They had a wooden floor that creaked. He was reading the newspaper. The person stopped right in front of him. He dropped the edge of the newspaper to see what they wanted, and there was no one there. He looked around the house. He suddenly realized perhaps my aunt wasn't losing it after all. He began to think, what have we brought into the house recently that could explain what's going on around here? He realized that they had bought an old dresser at an auction. He went to the auction house and he asked the auctioneer, where did that dresser come from that I had bought a couple of weeks ago? The auctioneer said, well, this old woman died and we had to sell all of her furniture in a way to pay for her funeral. And who was this old lady? Well, we don't really know, but it's said that she was into some really strange things. My uncle went home, grabbed the dresser, drug it out the door, threw it out by the curb, told all the kids that thing is not coming back in this house. From that moment on, they never heard any more footsteps across the floor at night. One theory of why a deceased family member may return, it's called volunteers. They come back from the dead to look out for family members. Kind of like a guardian angel, except one that once walked the earth. Other people believe they have unfinished business here on the earth. They were in the middle of something important when they passed away, and now they are trying to come back so they can possibly finish whatever it was that they weren't able to finish when they were alive. Then there are those that it's said are afraid to go to the other side. Perhaps they don't feel they were good enough to make it into heaven. Maybe they're concerned they're going to the other place. Or they're just simply afraid of the unknown. Does it make sense that a ghost could be afraid? Well, why not? What is a ghost? It's simply a person who's passed on. If you're afraid of things on this life, why wouldn't you be afraid of things in the other? During World War I, they had an exceptional number of people who said they were awakened in the middle of the night to see their son standing at the foot of the bed in his uniform. They would look at their son standing there and ask, aren't you supposed to be over there in Germany or in France? And then their son would fade away. Later they would discover that their son had died in battle, approximately the same time that they had seen the ghost. It was almost as if the ghost of their son had returned home to say goodbye to his parents before passing on to the next life. This was reported on numerous occasions. No one can explain it, nobody understands it, but it was reported more than once. The Deep South, ghosts are referred to as haints. More in the Georgia, Alabama section of the country. But anytime you hear somebody refer to a haint, that's simply a southern ghost. A poltergeist. Unlike the movie, poltergeist is a noisy ghost. Most of your ghosts are simply an apparition. You can see them, but you can't hear them. Poltergeist, on the other hand, you can hear them. They're the ones that crash around in the living room in the middle of the night, tip over furniture, make weird noises. Then you got something called the Poultrygeist. Oh, that's the ghost of a dead chicken. A doppelganger, also known as a double goer. Some say a doppelganger is the harbinger of evil. Some say it's your evil twin. Now, the strange thing about a doppelganger is they're reported as showing up even when the person that they are representing is still alive. A very famous case is the Little Green Lady. This took place in San Patricio, Texas, about halfway between Laredo and Corpus Christi. San Patricio was a town established by a group of Irish immigrants. They moved into the Mexican territory looking for some place to call home. The military at that time were unable to protect all of the small outposts throughout what was then called northern Mexico, what's now referred to as the great state of Texas. Because the military was unable to protect all these small establishments all throughout the northern part of the country, they would loan artillery to the townspeople. Now, we're not talking these gigantic field guns that you see in the movies. The average cannon was about 2 feet long, fired a ball about 3 inches across, and usually the wagon that the cannon was mounted on was about 10 times as big as the cannon itself. But when the Indians were attacking, or the marauding bands of outlaws, it didn't take much to dissuade them from trying to take over your town. Very famous location for one of these cannons was Gonzales. When Texas started making noises like they wanted to secede from Mexico, Santa Anna got kind of worried because, hey, he'd loaned all these little towns these cannon, and if the townspeople decided to use the cannon against the Mexican army, oh, it might not go the way he wanted it to. So Santa Anna ordered his troops to go out and round up all of these cannon and bring them back. When the soldiers showed up at Gonzales, the people of Gonzales announced, "Come and take it." And then they proceeded to pretty much destroy the Mexican army in that section of Texas. Well, the Lieutenant Garcia, who was in Fort Lipantotlan, hope I pronounced that correctly, near San Patricio, Texas, had heard what happened in Gonzales, and he really didn't want to go that route. So he decided he would use tact and deceit to get his cannon back. So he went to the people of San Patricio and he said, "Hey, I need to borrow that cannon because my men need to practice using it tomorrow, and I promise as soon as we're done, we'll give it back to you." The people of San Patricio had no reason to not believe Lieutenant Garcia, so they loaned him his cannon back. The lieutenant took the cannon and returned to the fort, the other side of the Nueces River. Well, when the people of San Patricio discovered that this had been a ruse, they were a little upset. So they marched on the fort, demanding that the lieutenant return that cannon that didn't really belong to them in the first place, but they wanted it back. Now, the fort wasn't like what you'd expect a fort to be, with walls and garrisons and crenellated tops. The fort was simply a collection of buildings with soldiers in it. There were approximately 40 soldiers, and there were about 200 townspeople. The soldiers, mostly conscripts, decided, we don't really have a dog in this fight, and they left. The lieutenant, he manned his post and received a mortal wound defending his fort from the townspeople. The townspeople grabbed the cannon and drug it back to San Patricio, but when they got to the middle of the river, the cannon broke loose from its mountings and was lost in the river. The townspeople next discovered that Lieutenant Garcia had been injured in the battle. They felt bad about that because they didn't really intend to hurt anyone. They just wanted their cannon back. So the people of San Patricio went back to the fort. They got Lieutenant Garcia. They took him back to town with them, and they attempted to nurse him back to health. They put a bed in the living room of the house. They brought in any kind of a person that could possibly do any kind of medical treatment, and they tried to save the lieutenant's life. One afternoon, a woman wearing a green dress suddenly appeared in the living room. No one had heard a wagon pull up outside, and no one had seen the front door open. Where did this woman come from? She walked to the side of the bed where the lieutenant lay. The lieutenant looked up at her and said, "It's my fiancée. She's come all the way from Mexico City to be with me." He reached out his hand for her, and as he did, his hand passed through her body. The people in the house were amazed to see that this was simply an apparition. It wasn't a real human. They decided this must be a ghost. Every day, approximately the same time, the woman in green would appear in the living room and go to the lieutenant's bedside. Unfortunately, the lieutenant's wounds were such that he was unable to survive. He passed away after a few days and was buried somewhere in San Patricio's cemetery. The woman in green returned the next day, walked over to where the bed had been placed, and sat on a chair right next to the bed. And she continued doing this for months, even though the lieutenant was no longer there. One day, after several months of this, the woman stopped showing up at the house, and everyone simply assumed that the spirit had realized the lieutenant was no longer there. Then they got word from Mexico City. The young woman who had been coming every day to see the lieutenant had died in Mexico City. Her spirit had stopped showing up at the house at approximately the same time that the woman had died. Perhaps the two are together now that they are both deceased. San Patricio has quite a reputation for unusual activity. If you're of the mind you wish to visit San Patricio, simply drive towards Corpus Christi, Texas, from Laredo. When you're halfway there, look for a highway sign that says 666 on it. Yes, it's there. I've seen it. Highway 666. It will take you to San Patricio, Texas. We'll be back in a few moments after these important words. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing ghosts or just your neighbors, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Looking for a great cup of coffee? The Organic Man Coffee Shop at 1108 Lincoln, downtown Laredo, Texas. Serving only the best organic coffee in the world. Not a coffee person? They have hot chocolate, hot tea, and iced drinks if that's your drink of choice. The Organic Man Coffee Shop, 1108 Lincoln, downtown Laredo, just a half block west of the Mercado.
Little Farm, más de 30 especialidades de pechuga de pollo, fresco, natural, empanizado, congelado, preparado. Visítanos en Lincoln 3130 esquina con Morelos, Colonia Juárez, al teléfono 719-3044. Fácil de cocinar en casa. Little Farm.
En RG Servicios Aduanales y Ramírez Distribution Services contamos con un equipo de profesionales técnicos en comercio exterior, ejecutivos de cuenta, tramitadores y personal administrativo que se encargará de orientarlo y mantenerlo oportunamente informado de todos los cambios en materia aduanera y procedimientos relacionados con el despacho de sus mercancías. RG Servicios Aduanales, Coahuila 1520 Nuevo Laredo, 867-719-1804 y Ramírez Distribution Services, 501 Nafta Boulevard, Laredo, Texas, 956-726-8940.
No, don't say goodbye. Stay with us. This is Arcanasa Radio. Quédate con nosotros. Estás escuchando Arcanasa Radio.
You're listening to Arcanasa Radio. Welcome back from that brief pause in the stories. Residual hauntings, as opposed to what they call an intelligent haunting. A residual haunting is when you see a ghost that simply does the same thing over and over, but doesn't seem aware of you or anything around it, as opposed to an intelligent haunting, where you can actually interact with the spirit. These are the ones where the people with the EVPs, the electronic voice phenomenon, they ask questions and they actually get a response on some occasions. There was a situation in London where a plumber was working in the basement of a bar, what they call a pub, when a legion of Roman soldiers went walking past him. He was so startled by what he was seeing that he stopped what he was doing and simply stared at him. As they were walking past him, he said some of the soldiers actually turned and looked at him with a surprised look on their face, as if, what am I seeing? Then the soldiers slowly faded away. Later, the plumber discovered that he was working in a building that was built right next to what used to be a highway built by the Roman army back when the Romans had conquered England. Why this would happen? Who's to say? But he swears he saw the Roman soldiers and he thought they saw him too. Ghost ships. Ghost ships have been reported throughout the history of sailing. No one, I think, on this planet is near as superstitious as people at sea. Some ghost ships have a rather bizarre story behind them, such as in southern Chile. The ship is called the Caluche. It appears every night near an island of Chiloé. According to local legend, the ship sails the waters around the area, carrying with it the spirits of all people who have drowned at sea. When spotted, the Caluche is said to be strikingly beautiful and bright. It's well lit, and it's always accompanied by the sounds of merriment and partying, people laughing. Apparently this is the party ship at sea for ghosts, which is a much better take than the story of the most famous ghost ship of all, the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman has been seen plying the waters throughout the world for years. And it's said if you see the Flying Dutchman, it means something bad is about to happen. Just about any sailor who has spotted the Flying Dutchman has said shortly thereafter they were engulfed in a tremendous storm. Sometimes the ship they were on was taken down. Sometimes members of the crew didn't survive. The Flying Dutchman was originally a Dutch merchant trader who was going back and forth from India delivering his cargo to Europe. And he was supposed to have made a deal with the devil to allow him to get around the Cape of Good Hope, which is one of the most notorious locations when it came to storms. And because he had made a deal with the devil that for the rest of eternity his ship and the captain are doomed to try to make it around the Cape of Good Hope, and there always seems to be a storm when the Flying Dutchman is seen. There are also ghost trains. Most famous ghost train in the United States would be the St. Louis ghost train that runs between Prince Albert and St. Louis in Saskatchewan. They also refer to it as the St. Louis Light. People have been seeing this light going through an area where the train used to run. No one knows what's causing the light. They can only say it's a ghost train. Why are ghosts seen wearing clothing? Well, we wear clothing. I wouldn't be seen walking out the door without my clothes on. Simply because a person passes on doesn't mean they're going to stop wearing clothing. So, depending on how the person felt about themselves, whether they were a neatly dressed, well-endowed individual, or someone didn't have a lot of money, didn't feel very good about themselves, the ghost is going to appear in whatever kind of a garb they feel is appropriate for them. So if the person really felt good about themselves, they're going to be a sharp-dressed ghost. And if they didn't feel real good about themselves, they'll probably appear in rags, nasty-looking, somewhat scary. A lot of ghosts are reported as the woman in white or the woman in red. But then you get the woman in green, too. So color doesn't seem to be a problem when it comes to ghosts. I think it's whatever color of clothing that person liked. Why can't a ghost have fashion sense? Then you've got scary ghosts. Or are ghosts scared? That would simply depend on the person. After all, remember, ghosts were people once too. Finally, if you want to try investigating haunted locations, very first thing you do, get permission. Don't go into some location with your video camera and your recording device and run around thinking you're hunting ghosts. You're going to wind up talking to the police. Once that has happened, if you ever try to join a legitimate paranormal research society, say the Laredo Paranormal Research Society, they're going to ask you, have you ever been arrested, and if so, why? If they find out you're arrested for breaking into somebody's property, they might not want to welcome you into the group. Get permission before you go. Even if it's a cemetery, ask before you go in there. You don't want to get arrested for trespassing. Safety. Safety is the most important consideration. Lots of people have been injured, and some people have been killed, poking their noses into places where they shouldn't be. One of the more notorious locations is the Pope Lick Railroad Trestle in Louisville, Kentucky. Dozens of people have died going out on that trestle, believing that the trains don't run across it anymore. Boy, are they surprised when a train is coming from the other end. The trestle is about 750 feet long. If you're out in the middle of the train bridge and there's a train coming, you can't run fast enough to get back to the other side. Someone once said what you need to do is to drop down between the tracks and hang underneath the train. With a train passing over your head, the entire bridge is going to shake. It's going to shake violently. Some of those trains are so long that you can have to hang under that bridge for 20 minutes while everything all around you is vibrating. Take my advice. Safety first. Don't go to places that you don't know what's going to happen. Now, the Pope Lick Bridge is the home of a notorious creature known as the Goat Man. And the Goat Man is said to entice people out onto that bridge. But the Goat Man is not a ghost, so we're not going to go into him tonight. Perhaps we'll keep him on hold for a later show. When you're filming, once you get inside the property, hold the camera still. I don't know how many videos I have watched on YouTube or on my computer loaned to me by other people where the person holding the camera swings it to the right, swings it to the left, swings it to the right, swings it to the, and all you can see is the blur of the motion of the camera. The camera is not given a chance to focus on whatever it is you're aiming it at. Point the camera in one direction, hold it there for a couple of seconds, allow the camera to focus, then gently move it in another direction. And by all means, be sure and lose that little strap that hangs down the side of the camera, because as you're moving back and forth, the strap is going to swing back and forth in front of your lens. And then when you're reviewing the evidence later at home, you're going to say, hey, look, there's a ghost. No, it's a strap. Safety. Did I mention safety? It is of the utmost importance. You do not want to become an inhabitant of somebody else's property, becoming a ghost simply because you didn't play it safe. If you take a photograph, aim at a particular object, click a picture, then click a second picture. It's always good to take 2 photographs of the same spot. That way, if something shows up in one photograph and it doesn't show up in another photograph, they can't say, oh, that's just a reflection off of something. Always take 2 photos. Now with digital photography, it's not going to cost you anything for a second picture. For a long time, they had something called ghost photography. A photographer would take a photograph of a person, and then in the process of developing the film, they would slip a little ghost into the back of the picture. This has gotten to be so prevalent these days that if you had a world-class photograph of a ghost, somebody's going to say, oh, that's photoshopped. So really, photography is slowly becoming a thing of the past. We have ghosts in different cultures. If you're in Japan and you said, I saw my dead grandmother yesterday, other people would say, what'd she say? How did she look? For some odd reason here in the United States, we have this strange culture that people are crazy if they see ghosts. When I was in the Army, I spent a lot of time asking people questions about ghosts and things because I've always been interested in that sort of thing. People living in the North almost always said, ghosts? No such thing. Whereas people living in the South, if I said anything about ghosts, they would say, let me tell you my story. Hope you all have enjoyed tonight's presentation. Next week, we'll be back, same time, same channel. I'm thinking of doing a show on Bigfoot. I know a lot of people out there have said they're very much into cryptids, cryptozoology, creatures like that. We don't have any local cryptid legends here in Laredo, aside from the flying manta ray. So we'll be talking about Bigfoot and other cryptids from around the state. If you have any good stories you'd like to pass on to me, you can contact me at chrisjames@stx.rr.com. Give me an email and we'll see about getting you into print. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio.